Hey guys, welcome to today's class video. So for today, I'm going to do a quick overview of some of the content of How Long Till Black Future Month, and then put the evaluators into relationship to both what Jemison has to say in How Long Till Black Future Month, and also Moore's Utopia briefly, and then at the end talk some about the ways in which Jemison offers us examples of narrative techniques that we can use in the projects that we're working on. So the first thing I want to say is what does Jemison love about speculative fiction? And so speculative fiction is just a word for the agglomerated or accumulated range of sci-fi, fantasy, horror, comics, superhero fiction, utopian, dystopian fiction, etc. It's like the master term for all of those genres. So what is it that this like great award-winning sci-fi and essayist writer, what does she love about these genres? And so she tells us at the beginning, right, that she's been, this is How Long Till Black Future Month, that she's been consuming science fiction and fantasy since she was a child, that it started with mythology and folklore. She worked her way through Golden Age greats, Dungeons and Dragons, Star Wars. So in addition to texts, science fiction also appeals to her because it's bound up in these personal relationships, which is one reason I would imagine that this essay is written from the first person. So again, if you're thinking about narrative techniques, that you are welcome to play around with first person in your future project. So again, this sets of relationships between her and different texts. Also included her relationship with her dad, who fed her habit by watching classic Twilight and Star Trek episodes every summer. So she started writing about talking animals in the apocalypse at 8 and never stopped. And so she has this sort of identity that's formed around geek and geek culture. So I would say, in addition to like creating fun and exciting universes, her relationship with her dad and with others, right? So the texts that we appreciate help us build sets of relationships with others. She also argues, and this is what the essay builds up to, that speculative fiction in all its different generic permutations offers a kind of normalcy, like somewhat ironically, you get in the myriad worlds and sets of representation in something like Star Wars, a kind of heterogeneity that can be absent from not only realist fiction, but also speculative fiction as well. So after this analysis, or within this analysis of Monet's Many Moons, she argues this is our description of this video that I invite you to watch. There's a middle-aged Chinese vampire dandy in the audience. Yeah, I don't know either, but it doesn't jar my suspension of disbelief, because there's just so much else to look at that I do believe. I can swallow the batshittery because everywhere else there is comforting, delightful normalcy, right? So this normalcy, though, is set in opposition to some of the drawbacks or problems that she perceives, or not perceives, that are a true fact of writing broadly, but of speculative fiction in certain specific permutations. So, for example, it doesn't matter which book I'm reading. I could name you a dozen others just like it. This isn't magical medieval Europe. It's some white supremacist, neo-feudalist fantasy of same. And I'm so fucking sick of it that I put the book down and I open my laptop and I start writing. So she explains that even as like her love for sci-fi comics at all is developing, while, you know, there's certainly Octavia Butler, authors like Janelle Monáe, So authors like Monet are in contradistinction to lots of sci-fi and fantasy that are just like endless colonialist white supremacist fantasies that cast black and brown characters and often gendered others as victims or slaves or mindless bad guys. That is, if they represent non-white characters at all. So from the gazillions of books that info medieval Europe that's supposed to, be an approximation of a future or another world, to things like the Jetsons, non-white characters, gendered others, disabled bodies, etc., can also be left out completely. So you get like one-dimensional bad guys or like damsels in distress, or just like completely overlooked, right? So Jemison responds to this absence of representation by producing her own work, by being attuned to all sorts of other sets of representation over lots of different, that stretch over different genres, right, from music to TV, movies, games, etc. And then finally, the other issue, then I began to realize that the exclusions I'd noticed were not just a matter of benign neglect. Robert E. Howard wrote endless pulp stories set in fantastical Africa and Asia, and centered all of them on white men. Nebula and Hugo Award-winning author Samuel Delany, in his 1998 essay Racism in Science Fiction, shares his experience of having a story rejected by one of the most celebrated editors in the genre solely because the protagonist was black, right? So the downfall, to sum up, are to the extent that non-white people are represented at all, they're often represented two-dimensionally, or people of color and people who write about characters of color are often denied the ability to publish, right? So if you are writing about a world threatened by white supremacy, both the content, the argument that Jemison makes here, right, that speculative fiction holds up a mirror to the world that we inhabit, and or allows us to use or test solutions that would not be possible in the real world, then this text can be useful for the project that you're working on. Finally, I might say really quick, I guess that's it. Okay, so let's move on to the next set of questions. Oh, no, I'm sorry, I didn't answer this question. So for Jemison, finally, what does it mean to celebrate and imagine the Black future in addition to archiving and honoring Black history? So again, this is a class about the future. So we might say, I'm sorry. That she says, it's easy to look at something like Monet's mythos and see only the obvious metaphors. Her android struggle for the freedom to live after all parallels the struggle of American slave women to legally marry partners of their choosing, to keep their children, to control their very bodies, in a system which made all of those things commodities. But it's wrong to apply only a historical and racial lens to the work of any modern Black woman. We've spent generations sharing the struggles of other oppressed groups, collaborating with and occasionally being betrayed by them, and progressing nonetheless. We're the ones who literally wrote the book on intersectionality, and it's clear that Monet feels no sense of threat from the others with whom our future will be shared. She welcomes all with love and dancing. And so I think it's important, Afrofuturism, or the type of spec fic that Jemison and Monet are engaged in, provides a vision of the world that we live in and a vision of the future that we can strive to inhabit, right? As opposed to the white supremacist fantasies of bulk of fiction, right? And human institutions. Okay. In addition, we might also think about the way that Jemison's story that was published in Wired magazine falls out across some of the same fault lines that I'm asking you guys to work under for the New Futures project, right? So according to Jemison's story, so according to the evaluators, what are the major problems in our world, or the fictional world of Earth that the contact team inhabit? And so a few, right, are, oops. There it is. Okay. So remember, here we got this word Anthropocene again. We bumped into it a couple of times so far this semester. Remember that the Anthropocene is the word given to the period that we find ourselves in which humans are the greatest geological force on Earth, affecting web species, rock formations, atmosphere, in a way that far exceeds any other force, right? And so to the detriment of life spectacularly, right? So you'll see from my FC report that Dar Makana is home to a plethora of species, substantially more than our own, which is yet to recover from the advent of our Anthropocene, right? So she also stages in the discussion between the evaluator and this character, the question of overpopulation. So we have a problem with overpopulation and its effects, crowding, homelessness, starvation, worse. We're correcting now, but the problem took a long time to develop, so it'll take a long time to resolve. And finally, there's others, but certainly a kind of emphasis on economic prosperity over and above an emphasis on sustainability or the value of living beings is a final, the final nail in the coffin of the community that the contact team come from, right? So just like the projects that I'm asking you to write, here are these sets of problems, right? Anthropocene, overpopulation, which is a part and parcel of Anthropocene, and then also evaluating accumulation over life itself, right? How does her Earth, or how does the fictional world that she imagines solve for the problems that plague Earth, or what are the evaluators? And so we know that the evaluators are the super predator species that prey on the inhabitants of Dar Menkana, and then ultimately on the Earth from the inside. And so we get here this, sorry. Next one. Theory time. Let's say so this is an explanation of the evaluators. Let's say your species is threatened by an enemy so insidious that all the usual survival techniques are useless against it. It's an enemy that can camouflage itself enough to get really close during hunting. Maybe it can fool you even up close. What if only specializing a full-time protector for the weakest members of your species, a nurturer, gives your people any hope of survival against an enemy like that? What if even that doesn't stop it? What if, in the end, you can't beat them, so you join them, right? So, somewhat creepily, this culture has solved the problem of overpopulation and a lack of resources, right? But the solution to the problem is so much worse potentially than the problem itself, right? So, well, the story solves for issues of sustainability. The cost is unbearable. So, a bit like Moore's Utopia, the text holds up a mirror to the contemporary world, the characters who try to piece the story together inhabit. So the solution of inviting in and handing over like the keys of the kingdom to the thing that threatens to kill you does sustain life, but is that really a life worth living, right? The lives of the inhabitants of this planet, right? Is that a fair trade-off, right? And so, well, there's lots of ways to interpret the evaluators and what they are, if I had to guess, I'd say that they stand in for a kind of technology or technological system that imitates human life in order to hold it in abeyance. And I think that, again, there's lots of different ways to read it. But if you are writing if you outlined AI as the greatest threat to human existence, then this sets of metaphors might be a thing that you might think about, right? So to what extent does AI threaten, I don't know, human life insofar as it can imitate human life and then suppress it, right? Okay, last question. How can one or both of Jemison's texts act as models for the projects that you're working on? So I think How Long Till Black Future Month and or texts like Janelle Monáe's Metropolis or the Arch Android can help you think through representing anti-racist futures, right? So again, if you diagnosed white supremacy, anti-black racism, etc., I don't know, settler colonialism as the greatest threat to the continued existence of life on Earth, here are 2 or 3 examples of imaginative futures that people can occupy in the absence of those threats, right? As for the evaluators, so the whole story is told through these like excerpts from different kinds of media, right? So you got direct message chains, recall derived from subject memories, public posts, reports, notes, government surveys, etc. And so you are welcome to use this type of genre and layout in your own project, which I can show you student examples of in a minute, right? You might also want to embed images, think about headings, and think about print and layout and design, right? So again, what I'm saying straight up is if you want to tell your new future project all as if it's, I don't know, a diary, or if it's sets of text messages, you can think about a way to incorporate those like generic elements. And then finally, I just want to say one last thing. So given that this essay, or I'm sorry, that this story was published in Wired magazine, I can't help thinking that the story speaks to our technological and environmental futures, which may be of interest to those of you who suggest that AI, telecom, or carbon emissions might render the future uninhabitable, right? So how does recasting tech as a kind of super predator allow you to think through some of the sets of problems that you outline? Okay, so final here is click over to New Futures. So click down, and then you can see first this template that I made, which has nonsense writing in it. But if you're interested in using a kind of document design and layout, then you are welcome to do so. And then just as a quick heads up, if you head over to Google Drive, and then you go to new file, Google Doc, let's see, click over here. You can click over to From a Template, and then you get all sorts of like pre-loaded template design and layouts. If you want to use Canva, if you want to use Adobe, you're welcome to. Word will also come with preloaded templates, right? So that was just File, and then down to New From a Template. You got all sorts of design and layout options that you are welcome to take advantage of. So again, this is me saying you are welcome to write just a straight up essay. But if you would like to pursue different design options, you're also welcome to do that. So I've loaded some of my students' examples from the last couple of semesters that we've done this. So here's one that's both fictional, right? Includes dialogue. It's a person who travels to a future world and then reports back. And also sets of imagery, right? So this is this student model takes advantage of, I think, a Google Docs template. So, and then casts his essay as if it's a report to the UN. So same with this one. Oh no, this is the UN. An excerpt of a speech to be delivered to the General Assembly. Actually, this one might be the same. So again, as much creativity in design and content as you like, so long as, and this is my final note, you accomplish these goals, right? So the two things that this essay needs to do are try to solve for the problem that you diagnosed in such a way that you envision a future or a future world that can kind of use or test that solution, and such that you can start to think about the effects of change across broad integrated systems. You need to think about the solution to your problem across at least 5 of the topics listed here. If there's other topics not listed, you can go ahead and let me know. All right, sorry that was kind of long. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks so much.